So we were chatting about David Bailey. And what was it he said to you, Debbie?
Say it with the same emphasis. He said to me, I'm going to fuck you one day, Condon. And I didn't say anything much, I don't think. I thought not on your Nelly. But,
Not on your Nelly, that's a good term. I haven't heard that for a long time.
well,
But I suppose would you describe yourself as a glamour model, a fashion model, or?
oh no, a glamour model is people who take all their clothes off.
Right.
I was, no, what is it? I guess it's called a fashion model. Because I wasn't we didn't do catwalk in those days, you see. I mean, the top girls in London really didn't do catwalk. I did one catwalk charity show with Celia Hammond in aid of some animals, I think. And but otherwise, we didn't do that. That didn't happen until the 80s with all of the supermodels, because we weren't supermodels, we were top models. Supermodel came in with Christy Turlington and Linda Evangelista and all those people.
So you were mainly working as a model in the 60s?
Yeah. Maybe the early 70s, but the 60s really.
And how did you get into modeling?
Well, I got into modeling when I left New York as a teenager, and I went to Paris with my parents, and I had a lot of French friends, and I was coming outside the Lycée in Paris with another friend of mine, and Marie Claire were looking for what they called current teenage fashion. So Marie Claire picked us up and did a feature on us and on what we were wearing. And what I wasn't aware that what I was wearing was particularly outstanding, but it kind of was in a way. The thing that I was wearing gray suede loafers and white bobby socks, which I suppose you could call that pretty trendy in the 60s in Paris. But and I also had a kind of calf-length gray corduroy Mac with a yellow velvet collar, yellow leather collar, and the grey suede loafers. And we just presented as being something kind of amusing. And then from that, Elle saw the Marie Claire stuff, and I used to work. You didn't go to school on Thursdays and Saturdays, on Thursday afternoons and Saturdays in Paris. You went in the morning to school, but not in the afternoon. So I modeled for Elle in the afternoon on Saturdays in Jardin des Modes and Jardin des Modes Junior, and then I thought it was all too much money for doing nothing in particular. So, and I went back to New York, and then in New York, I met Bert Stern at a party, and he said he would use me, then I went back to Europe, and he said if I came back he'd use me, but I never went back. And but then when I was working at Magnum Photos, Frank Horvat, who's a very top photographer, did a big makeover of me on Glamour. They cut my hair, and I had slimming pills and got really sort of thin and scrawny and with this short hair, and had this big makeover pages in Glamour magazine that was very successful. And Dolores Hawkins apparently admired my pictures so that was a great compliment. But my to-be husband had a play on in Greenwich Village, and then he asked me to come to Europe with him. So I walked away from New York modeling, which hadn't really started but could have done, and I came back to Europe, and we went to Dea to stay with Mattie Clarwan, and there was a girl there called Jill Latour, who was modeling for the cover of the Santa Ana album, because Mattie had done a very well-known painting for the Santa Ana album of the Annunciation, which was a bold, naked black girl astraddle a bongo drum.
This was Santana.
Santana
Was the band, yes.
Yeah, sorry. And so when I went back to Paris, she gave me a note to take to the editor-in-chief, Peter Knapp, the editor-in-chief of Elle. I didn't know what it said, but and a little present for him. So I went along and handed over this thing, and he opened it. It was a pair of black Y-fronts.
Oh.
And he read the note, and then he made a phone call and gave me an address and said, go to this address now, they're shooting. And that's how I got back into modeling. And I worked for Elle, then I worked for everybody all the time. But so I pitched up at this shoot where there was a girl called Sophie Dairley there, who was one of the top French girls. She wasn't a high fashion model really, but she was a very, very big deal French girl. And she was the only girl on the job until Peter Knapp sent me along.
Right.
And then she had to share the shoot with me.
How did all the models get on? Was there a lot of bitchiness among the models?
No.
No.
Well, certainly it was very different in England. When you went abroad, people treated you like a lump of clay. You were something they'd hired and you just got on with it. But in England, it was like a club. And particularly the girls who worked for John French, he had like 10 girls he used, 10, 12 girls, Tanya Mallet, Pauline Stone, Jean Shrimpton, me, and various others, you know, and he had a lovely little chap who came in and brought us tea in the morning and coffee in the morning and tea in the afternoon into the dressing room. And it came on a tin tray with a picture of Roy Rogers and Trigger on it. And it was the same, it was like going to school.
Yeah.
It was the same every day. Morning, John, go in the dressing room, get ready, do the shot, hour off, go and buy a cheese sandwich or something, come back, do the afternoon. And then, and we were all mates. Mary-Lise Gray was my great mate.
Because that book you gave me about Norman Eales.
Yes.
The photographs of you in that, you're very much kind of that elegant classical style of model. But I suppose in the 60s it went to like people like Jean Shrimpton and then Twiggy, of course, it's much more like a waif-like, slightly different
Twiggy
style.
was later.
It's later, yeah.
I did work a couple of times with Twiggy, but I don't even know if she'd remember. And she was definitely sort of later.
Mm.
But Jean, I did work with Jean quite a few times. But it was very, I mean, I can show you the John French book. They did an exhibition of John French at the V&A, and I'm in that. And they are very much, because John French, you see, the difference was, so there was the thing called le style Eales, and le style Eales was very natural, and running at the camera and laughing a lot and all that. But John French used a static camera, so he would say, still, and David Bailey would press the button. But John French was actually standing to one side, looking at you and saying, still, but he didn't even press the button. But then these handheld cameras came in, where they followed you with the camera, and the movement was much more possible. That's kind of how the movement crept into it. And then I had a page in the Sunday Times that when Bridget Keenan was working for the Sunday Times Fashion, and I had a page about freckles, because I painted on these freckles, and so they made a big thing about the freckles, because that was all the thing of being natural. Moving and being natural. And it was a kind of reaction to the Barbara Golan period, when people stood about in ball gowns, you know.
But even in that time, models were taking slimming tablets to keep thin. Was that common?
I took slimming tablets in order to become a model, but I didn't take them anymore once I'd modified my diet. And I don't really know. I think, yes, I know I did have a friend. There was a very friendly doctor in London who was good at that sort of thing, whether they were slimming or keeping you going or whatever kind of tablets. But slimming tablets I had, you had to be weighed. You had to go into the doctor. It was in New York I got them. You had to go into the doctor like once a week and be weighed, and then they assessed you and they gave you a new set of them, but I didn't know what was in them. They were sort of take a peach one in the morning and a pale green one at lunch and two light blues in the evening kind of thing. And basically what they were about was they made you feel like eating was just an absolutely disgusting activity. You had absolutely no interest in food. And, but I didn't feel anything other than that, except that when I got to Paris, I came across a box of them left over without the doctor's supervision and thought, oh, I think I'll just pop a couple of these. And my hands and feet went numb. I remember thinking, oh, maybe not such a good idea. And I don't know why, what it was in them that happened, but...
So you, Debbie, you were born in New York.
Yes.
Now, the other thing about you that I find fascinating with regards to my own research is that your father was Richard Condon, and he was the author of The Manchurian Candidate. So that was, of course, made into a film with, was it Laurence Harvey and
Frank Sinatra
and
Janet Leigh.
That was 1959, so you must have been a young girl then, or a young lady?
Oh, young lady, very much so, yes. I think it was 1959. I was kind of about, was I maybe 20 or something? I can't remember. And but I wasn't kind of, it was the end of my life with my parents, because they traveled a lot, and in that he had this fetish for moving house. So when he wrote The Manchurian Candidate, he had a year's sabbatical from the United Artists Film Company, because he had been in charge of the Paris office of United Artists, which is why we went to Paris. But his boss, who was my godfather, gave him a year's sabbatical wages, and then he wrote The Oldest Confession. It was his first novel, which was very well received, and then he wrote The Manchurian Candidate in New York, and then we moved to Mexico.
Right. So he also wrote, I think, Prizzi's Honor.
Well, yes, that was much later.
That was later.
That was the 80s more.
But The Manchurian Candidate turned into a bit of a cult film, almost like film noir, connected with some of the CIA activities with regards to mind control. But do you think he researched that independently, or did he have any connection with the CIA?
He researched it independently.
Yeah.
He was an antisocial person, so he didn't hang out with people and go to bars and do anything like that. And but Jack Kennedy read The Manchurian Candidate.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yes, and then he wrote a book called Winter Kills, which was made into a film, which was boycotted by the Kennedy family, because basically it was that Joe Kennedy, Jack's father, engineered Jack Kennedy's death, because Joe Kennedy was a crook, and Jack and Bobby were contriving to suppress the criminal elements that Joe was living off.
Yeah.
And
he was bootlegging, wasn't he, Joe Kennedy?
Yes. And this is apparently Tarantino's favorite film.
Really?
Winter Kills, yeah.
I have to see that. Would your father have hung out with people like the Kennedys, or was he in that world?
No, he didn't really hang out at all. He hung out a bit with Sinatra, but he just didn't really like people very much.
Yeah.
And but he was going to dinner. I've forgotten the name of the man who was the press secretary at the White House during the Kennedy regime, and he was going to dinner at that house, and he'd written Winter Kills at the time already, and Eunice Shriver, one of Kennedy's sisters, arrived, and when she heard that Condon was there, she walked out.
Really?
That's a compliment, isn't it?
I mean, did he have much involvement with making the film, or was he an advisor?
No, I don't think he did. He wrote these screenplay for Prizzi's Honor, but not much, because George Axelrod, was a very big brain in the movie business. George Axelrod directed it.
Mm.
No, Frankenheimer directed it. Axelrod produced it. So I think he was quite new to it. It was only his second novel, and he was, very trusting of these high-ranking professionals. So
he also worked on, I read the other day, Sergeant Bilko.
Did he?
Yeah, he was to do with the publicity for the Phil Silvers show, which is when I was a kid. I was used to watch that. So he had quite a varied interest. I mean, do you think?
Well, he was a publicist, you see.
Publicist,
by profession.
Yeah, because he was connected with Hollywood.
That's how it started with United Artists and everything. He was a publicist.
Yeah.
Because basically, the man who was the vice president of United Artists was somebody called Max Youngstein, who became a Hollywood producer. But Max Youngstein had been a salesman for Simplicity Patterns, and then he was a friend of Daddy's, and Daddy opened a PR company, and employed him under himself in his PR company. But so then Max rose to be the vice president of United Artists, and then he employed Daddy to be the publicist in Paris.
Okay. So when you say he left to go to Mexico, was there any particular reason why he went to?
I don't know why we went to Mexico, but he wrote A Talent for Loving when we were in Mexico, and they lived in Mexico. They lived in Switzerland. They just moved around a lot.
But you were independent of your.
Well, we got to Mexico, and I was about, I think I was maybe 20, and I had a rather rudderless life in Mexico City. I lived with my parents, but I just went out with people and did stuff like that. And then I went to New York and worked at Magnum and at the Spanish consulate in New York, and at Bonratello's, and I briefly was. No, that was before we went to Mexico. That I was secretary to the portraitist René Boucher. That was very interesting. But when I'm not good on chronology, but I went back to New York when I was 21, and I left them in Mexico and went to New York when I was 21, and got an apartment and worked for Magnum. And I worked for Magnum because while I was in Mexico, I was working for the American delegation to the Acapulco Film Festival, which was such a joke because I was only 20, and I was in charge of these two starlets, Evie Norland, and I can't remember the other one. Evie Norland was very important because she was engaged to James Garner, and James Garner didn't like the idea that she was on the loose in Acapulco, and I was supposed to keep an eye on her. They did remain married all their lives, though. When she finished the Acapulco Film Festival, she went back and married him, and they were married all their life.
But did you ever get to meet Frank Sinatra and Laurence Harvey when they were?
Oh yes.
In the film, but were you in that world as a model or as the daughter of Richard Condon?
Oh no, I knew him. Frank to do with Daddy because anyway, when I was 17, Daddy was doing the publicity on The Pride and the Passion, Stanley Kramer's film with Cary Grant and Sophia Loren and Sinatra. Sinatra had really accepted it as a way of being in Madrid and maybe getting Ava Gardner back. But so I had a little bit to do with Frank there, and then we went to his retirement concert at the V&A in London and sat in his box. So I didn't know him well, though.
Mm.
He was very nice to me.
And how about Laurence Harvey?
Well, Laurence Harvey was another matter. He sent flowers when I had my daughter back. He sent flowers to the hospital. But then he was married to my mate, Pauline Stone. He was going to be married.
Okay.
No, but that was really terrible because basically he was married to somebody called Joan Cohn at the time, who was the widow of Harry Cohn, the big Columbia Pictures man. And my parents were very friendly with Larry and Joan. And then I knew Pauline, who was actually pregnant at the time. And she read that he had married Joan in the paper. But then he divorced Joan and married her, so it all ended well, except that he died. So.
Yeah, he died young, didn't he?
Yeah.
But, Pauline Stone was also in that book, The Photographs by
Yes,
Norman
well,
Eales.
Pauline worked with Norman a lot.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like an incredibly glamorous life.
Well, it was fun.
And did you kind of carry on? I think you told me last time I came for tea that you had an affair with the Spanish bullfighter.
Well, a kind of an affair, because he was older. You know, older. You know, when you're 17, older is 24. But anyway, yes, we were very good friends, and I was very keen on him. He was very divinely good looking, and he was actually a matador. And he took me to the infirmary to see all the wounded bullfighters lying in the hospital. And I remember there was one called Cesar Huron, and I went by and he said, you know, "Hi there, girl, give me your telephone number." And it was fun, and I knew his family, and it wasn't quite like an affair. He was chasing after Abby Lane, Xavier Cugat's wife at the time. She was a bit older than him, and he's quite notorious now. He was called, he's still alive. You can see him on Google, Victoriano Valencia, and his daughter became a pop star in Madrid. I think she's called, I can't remember her name, because he was from a bullfighting dynasty, the Roger dynasty, Roger, and so they largely used, Valencia was the brand name. His great uncle or something had been a banderillero called Valencia, and it was the Valencia dynasty and the Roger dynasty. But his daughter is absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. He married a proper Spanish woman, you know, and but he's famous because he's famous because he's well known in Spain because he was a good matador, and he was also a lawyer. But he had a romance with one of the princesses of Savoy, Victor Emmanuel's daughter or sister or something, and she killed herself because he wouldn't marry her. So he has a kind of hello kind of personality, if you know what I mean. But